And now, the Android Basics segment. This is a segment where we discuss the things that power your device from behind the scenes. And now, here's this week's episode, Android Basics.
Talking about applying updates, specifically operating system updates versus security patches. Which are more important? Should you bother? Should you leave your device unprotected? Spoiler alert: no, you shouldn't. But Warren, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, so when we talk about OS and security patch, we're talking about that operating system. For those of you in Rio Linda, that's what we mean by OS operating system. And then, of course, we talk about the security patch, and that's the one that gets either pushed out monthly by the manufacturer, or sometimes if you're on some other manufacturers, they push like quarterly security patch updates and all of that. And so that's what we're talking about today. But we're starting first, though, with the OS updates, that is the system updates. Now, when we talk about OS updates, system updates, I'm going to be using those words interchangeably. And those system updates give us different look. For example, when Android started, if you go back to Android Donut, Gingerbread, Cupcake, or all of that, they kind of look like the same, not all that good looking. And then with KitKat or Jelly Bean, actually, and then KitKat, we had that hollow look. And then with Android Lollipop, Android 5, we have that material design, and that gave us a different look that was totally revolutionary, in other words, so to speak. And then I think it was with Android 12 that we've got the Material U, and then, of course, with Android 16, we have the expressive whatever design that we have. So from the UI perspective, visual perspective, OS updates bring us different visual looks. And then when we talk about the functionalities, that's another part of the OS system that we love to see, because certain things or capabilities that were not there in the previous ones, we now have them in the updates. So for example, I recall those days when we used to have Google Now or Google Assistant. It was Google Now first, and of course, back then, I recall that I was able to talk on the phone and at the same time be able to ask Google to tell me what the weather is. Now, though, as you can recall, lately, you cannot do that while you're on the phone or whatever it says the microphone is being used. And so these are some of the changes that come across with OS updates and all of that. But then also there are some functionalities like maybe multi-finger support or whatever that we have come to take for granted. Sometimes the OS in its early days didn't have that, or whatever the case may be, but now we have those. And then we also have security rules and all of that. In other words, the OS become more secure because Sally and Ed, Sally, if you remember earlier on, I mean, if you grant permission to an app, it just took advantage of everything. And whether it's your microphone, even if you didn't need
absolutely.
it, or even if it's contacts, it didn't need it, and it grabbed all of that. Let's talk about that. So you see what I'm talking about, Sally?
Absolutely. That was really, really dangerous thing. Speaking of those apps, I mean, when you just install that app and grant one permission, look, it was totally inside. I mean, there is nothing you can control about your contacts, your microphone, your notifications. All of them were like, you didn't have the control. I mean, the app had the full control. You didn't know what to do. You didn't. You just have to like uninstall it or restore back the defaults to get the functionalities removed from your phone. Otherwise, there was no other chance. But yeah, it's so it's such a privilege to remember where we're coming from those days to where we are now to be able to control all of the aspects of these permissions.
Do you remember the time when it was annoying the other way, though, when you used to have to go approve permissions before you could even install an app? I think that was the Jelly Bean days, isn't it? My first Android phone. And you couldn't even hit install until you'd done something about permissions, which was quite annoying.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
but
Yeah, I
but I
remember.
think the one that I find most annoying though, because I know nowadays we talk so much about data, and this is what gave Android a black eye, earlier on in the business
Mhm.
because of those permissions that the apps had access to. For example, you got something maybe like a TTS engine, or I mean, let's not even say TTS engine, but maybe like a mapping, for example, and it's
Mhm.
getting your a permission to your phone contacts or whatever. Yeah, one could say, yeah, I want to be able to say, hey, navigate to Sally's house, which of course makes sense. But I mean, so
Yeah.
for example, maybe an app that is just like a recording app and doesn't need my contacts, for example, or doesn't need my location as to whether I'm in Mongolia or whatever, and it grabs those location permissions
Yeah.
and it grabs everything, and it was just bad. And so because of that, bad guys were able to take advantage of that and then send out whatever to harvest or use keyloggers or whatever to see what one is typing or whatever, and all of that. And that's what gave Android a black eye in the first place. And so in my never to be humble opinion, as those things mature and now we have tighter security, the OS updates, for me, it's a must that we have OS updates, and try to keep it updated as much as you can, because you don't want someone getting stuff that they don't need. And I know, Ed, there's some of these that you are not happy with, especially file managers, for example.
Yeah.
It used to be that
Mhm.
with a file manager, you can access every part of the device. But now
Mhm.
we have that lockdown, don't we, Ed? I know it's one of those things that you complain about. Talk about that.
It's a big deal for me, and in a few weeks we'll talk about side loading, and it's all tied into the same thing. So I think that you should be allowed to have any app access any file on your computer that you want it to be able to. I'm not saying that should work by default. What I am saying is that should be for the user to decide, not for Google to decide. And there are very clever file management apps that will get around what they call scope storage, but the whole thing is annoying, as is restrictions of side loading, which happily Google has rolled back from. And as I say, that will be the subject of another episode, but it does annoy me. What I would say about updates, particularly OS updates, and Android has suffered less, I think, on this than iOS has, is while everybody should normally be encouraged to update, screen read users in particular can suffer if some functionality has been broken. On the Android side, that's more an issue for app updates, but it is a thing to bear in mind. A security patch
Absolutely.
probably
Here's
won't
what.
break access, except when we were running Android 11 and talkback 9.1, I think, when
Here. Mhm.
multi-finger gestures broke on many of our devices that weren't Google or Samsung. But you have to bear in mind that an update can change things, and an OS update is more likely to have an accessibility issue than a security patch will. But as I say, that hasn't really been an Android issue to date.
That's right, and I want to say something about it. Looking at the people around me and also seeing like what people write on communities, on different types of communities, I'm I'm able to see that most Android users are not hesitated to update to the update from their manufacturer, but when it comes to other part of the world, they're hesitant to update to the latest update of their OS version because they think that that will break their habits, that will break their screen reader. So they think that it's better to stay in very old iOS version just because it's working fine for them and they don't want to take the risk of updating to the latest version. But on Android side, like I can see that people are not really scared about it. I mean, we can discuss about it. Yeah, if when you listen to the podcast, guys, you can also write your comments on what you think. How is this situation if you were previously an iOS user, but now you're back to an Android? This is it. I can see that honestly. People don't like to update to latest iOS version at all. They want to stay where you are feeling where they are feeling safe, and it's much more usable for their phones. Mostly, some things get broken on their end. This is what I observed. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think there is a thing where iOS updates are rolled out universally, so you see that more. But at the same time, on Android, some users won't get updates that frequently, and so perhaps you don't see the those considerations. But I still think it's true that things go wrong more on iOS operating system updates than they do on Android operating system updates. Yeah, I don't know why that is.
Now, there's something that Ed mentioned earlier on, and that's about those screen readers that you mentioned, the multi-finger gesture, for example, when we were talking about, I think it was in Android 8.x or maybe 9, where we had the multi-finger support. And I remember Ed was so broken about it because it was working, and then his OnePlus quit working because those guys changed the TalkBack with 9.1. It took away that three-finger gestures and all of that. And I recall that with my Pixel 2, it did, but my Pixel 1, which was also on at least the same TalkBack and had Android 10 update, it didn't get it because it was dependent later on some update that the Pixel 1 didn't get. So these are some of the things that happen when we have system updates that make functionalities or break functionalities that we're talking about that you mentioned.
Yeah, it was Android 11 when it was introduced, and there was a Google and Samsung tie-up, and it was TalkBack 9. And it worked with certainly my OnePlus initially. And then Samsung and Google decided they wanted to keep three-finger gestures exclusively to them and their collaboration. And so they took it away. And so my OnePlus, which had this, then lost it. And I was very annoyed about it. It was Android 11 and then TalkBack 9.1.
Exactly. And so they moved it to where it needed to have Android 12 in order to be able to have those multi-finger gesture support. So this is one of those functionalities of the system update, the OS update that we're talking about that is important. So if you're buying a phone, in my never to be humble opinion, make sure that at the very least, get a phone that has at least 3 or at the minimum 4 years of OS updates. I mean, sometimes that's a tough call for a lot of the manufacturers out there. Motorola, I'm looking at you. OnePlus, I'm looking at you. Sony, I'm looking at you. But at least I wish that these guys could at least move up to at least 4 years, or make it even better, 5 years, so that people will enjoy their phones more. And our friend David Moore, this is a shout out to you, my man. You got a new phone, and I know you like keeping your phones for a while. So now you can see why I am an advocate for multiple year support for the operating system, because then you have that capability of taking advantage of the newer features that are coming through with the newer OS, regardless of the device that you have, whether you had it like 2 or 3 years ago. You should be able to have access to those new OS updates. And this is why, for me, it's Pixel all the way. Because, for example, let's look at it. Look at the Pixel 6 that came out in 2021. And that's getting Android 17. And if you look at other devices, and Samsung, for example, say Galaxy S21, I think it has long stopped receiving OS updates. So this is why, for me, I'm stuck in the Pixel motel and never getting out of that Pixel hotel.
Yeah, that really makes sense for keeping your phone for longer times. That was not a thing for choosing your phone regarding the update circle, but now it's getting there slowly, especially here in Turkey. People are concerned about how many years their phone will be updated, especially looking at those mid-ranger devices coming from China. They're also doing something for their phones, especially coming from Redmi, coming from Vivo. They are also doing some really good update circle for especially for their flagship and mid-tier devices. But for entry level, we are still at 1 or 2 years. I think that should change as well. Samsung is doing a good job for their entry level phones. Like when speaking about like starting from A16 and now A17, they have like 5 years of uh, Android updates and 6 years of security patches. And Samsung finally decided to follow Pixel for having 7 years of updates starting from S24 series. I got my S25 Plus, and this was one of the main reasons that I got this one. Otherwise, I would look for some other phones, especially Honor is doing good job as well for the flagship devices that's receiving 7 years of updates as well. So this is really important for choosing device. I mean, we should be really aware of what phone we are going to choose and for how long that we're going to use it. Functionalities, new features will be there as we get new updates, and mostly those phones not getting updates are really stuck, and yeah, it's no good for especially long time use. I think Pixel is doing a really great job in that sort. Like I know I really want to try one, but it's not, unfortunately it's not available in my area. But if they start selling it, I'll definitely get one for myself. But still, for me it's Samsung because they are second in terms of update circles, and they are really doing a good follow to Pixel lines. And this is powerhouse for Android as well.
Another thing I want to talk about or say kudos to Google for, you guys recall that back in those days, the complaint had always been that, oh, we're not able to give you those OS updates because Qualcomm was the one that was keeping us from giving you those updates because we couldn't natively support those drivers from Qualcomm, and it was dependent on them, and they were not doing what they were supposed to do. And so when Google started doing that Tensor chip, for example, you know, I know there are people out there that say they don't like the Tensor chip, but for me, I think the Tensor chip is a blessing because it has forced everyone to do what we've been asking for years, and that's the multiple years of OS updates. And so without Google jumping into this Tensor chip, we would have still been stuck there. And now it's also forced Qualcomm to come on board. Wherein you mentioned earlier on Sally, Samsung now also is now matching that because Qualcomm decides we're going to open it up to where you have 70 years of OS updates.
The good thing is now also MediaTek is following the same line, and they have 5 years of updates for their like flagship processors, like Dimensity processors. Are really doing a good decent job, and they also get like 5 years at least for those eligible or for those brands offering flagship phones. I think this is really going good.
And another good thing is that, for example, if you're retiring a phone or passing it down to someone, like a pass me down to someone, or selling it, for example, whoever you're giving it to will now be able to take advantage of the newer OS. You guys mentioned the Fruitvale on here, because if you look at Fruitvale, aka iOS, for those of you in Rio Linda out there, you notice that they're very notorious for cutting out apps that, oh, this app is not supported because you need a newer OS and all of that. It's so annoying. But Android, on the other hand, is very generous. So, for example, I'm looking at WhatsApp. Say you want to install WhatsApp on your Fruitvale 5. I think it's going to tell you it is not supported. You need iOS whatever X in order to be able to get it. While on the other hand, if you have an Android device with a Lollipop device from 2015, you can still install WhatsApp on there, and it's fully supported. So you see, we got lots of pluses here on the Android side, and that's another thing that I always look forward to, because most people like to use WhatsApp around the world, and people that don't have money, even if they have some phone from yesteryear, yesterday's one, for example, they'll be able to still run
Now,
those
here
messaging apps that they want.
also kudos to Google, because being a developer, it's not really like difficult to make an app working for older Android versions, because they're really helping those developers, providing those APIs and stuff for making your app compatible with older Android versions. This is really good. I think this is not really the case for iOS users, because each and every update, the framework changed quite much, and that's so like difficult for developers to, and that's also time consuming, because they want to they want to be focusing on the latest OS version, and they really neglect the older iOS versions. But Android, yeah, they're really doing a decent job. And for those who cannot afford new phones, or they want to stack with their phones, with their phones running older versions, their app's still going to work. That's something really good about Android. That's why I'm here.
Now let's talk about the security patch and the role, the important role. Now, so we've touched on it a little bit earlier on, but so for example, if you don't have the OS updates as frequently as whatever, which we've talked about, let's say, for example, if you only have OS support for 3 years, it is important that you get that security patch, because to be honest, there are bad guys out there, right? And so every time, every month, they're constantly trying to figure out a way of exploiting, our devices. And hence the reason why we keep getting these security patches either monthly or quarterly, for example. I know there's been very serious vulnerabilities out there that had to even do with the Linux kernel and all of that had to be fixed. So it is important that you get those phones that, at least, even if they're not giving you those years of OS support, be sure though that at least at the barest minimum, you have a phone that at least has 4 years of security patch. Sally, what's your thought on security patches? Because for me, I think it's also hugely important.
Well, this is huge important as getting the software updates, because security is like, we don't know what's going on backdoors, but every month Google is fixing, or something is fixing, more than dozens of vulnerabilities, and this is really important to get those updates. And yeah, we have these phones all day with us. We use bankings, we use all sort of transports, we use all sort of things, online shopping and stuff. And when your phone is not secure, imagine what would happen. Just imagine like your computer is really old, and all sort of things can go with your browser, the viruses and stuff. And security updates are really important in that matter. Um, Really, like getting a phone, as I said, at least 3 or 4 years of security patches, like you will know that your phone will be safe for every updates, because those manufacturers know what they should do to keep your phone safe. Looking at the release notes for every security update, I can really think that this is really important for the phones. And some people, I don't I don't know what's their motivation for that, but some people don't want to do those updates just because they don't want to start their phone. They don't want to restart their phone. But I mean, just take a time, update your phone, and you won't regret it. And it's better to have those updates rather than regretting yourself later. It's just a matter of time, just a couple of minutes, just do your updates, especially like for those who just use their phone, don't know about what Android versions do they have, what versions of software do they have. They're using their phones, but they don't know what's going on behind and how like open their phones are against threats. So what they should do is really giving themselves some time to update their phones, especially those security updates on a monthly basis. And definitely that's going to help them a lot, especially protecting their phones against all sorts of
I think one
threats.
of the problems is that, especially phones that offer security updates for several years, the pattern of those updates changes. So you might get updates monthly for a little while, and then you will get updates for longer, but they will then switch to quarterly, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think phone manufacturers should be much more transparent about how often updates are deployed. And then when that
Absolutely,
happens, if your
yeah.
phone is out of security updates, which also happens, I think you then have some choices. And I know we've talked about this in the past, and Warren's a bit of a skeptic, but you need to think about whether you want to install some sort of security software on your phone. So the security
Mhm.
patch is taking care of your phone on the back end, but do you want anything on the front end, like on your facing thing? You know, whether it's an Avast or an AVG or whatever. Do you want something on the front end of your phone trying to clear up stuff that perhaps your security patches can't clear up?
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that I'm a skeptic. No, I don't install those so-called security software. I'm looking at you, McAfee. Samsung, for some reason, still puts that crap on people's phones. It's damn annoying, if you ask me. But now, seriously, if people, or if manufacturers rather, I should say, could just come up straight and say, we're just going to give you quarterly updates, I'm okay with that. So I know that at least in every year, I get at least 4 updates for every year. I wouldn't mind that necessarily, because if there's something that is bad out there, you know for sure that they're going to be fixing it. Now, Motorola, I'm looking at you. You've got great phones, and I would recommend a Motorola phone in a heartbeat. But the only reason why I wouldn't or hesitate to recommend a Motorola phone is because of those lack of security updates. For example, they push updates and then all of a sudden they stop, like in 2 years or whatever, and it's so annoying. You've got a great phone, and yet you don't have those security patches. And so for me, really, it's very hard to recommend phones like that. But yeah, I would be satisfied with quarterly updates. If you can't do monthly, at least let's do quarterly, or maybe twice a year, for example. I think some people will find that to be okay. What do you guys think about that?
I just think it needs to be clear. Like, tell me when the updates are going to apply. If you're going to change it over the course of your support, tell me you're going to change it. Because, you might buy a phone that has monthly updates, and as I say, it might switch to quarterly. They say they have 4 years of updates, but that changes. So let's all be transparent about what that is, and then people can make their choices, can't they?
Yeah, and that's why I was saying that, it's good to let people know upfront when you're getting the phone, indicate that, yeah, we're going to be giving you security patches, but the way we're going to be implementing these security patches is in a quarterly manner, or maybe every 2 months or whatever. So you get 6 security patches if we're doing it bi-monthly, or you get 4 if we're doing it quarterly, for example, or if we're only giving you 2 security patches every year, then I know that I'm getting a phone that would only get patched twice a year. So it's up to the user to decide then what to do. But don't give me a phone that you're giving me monthly updates, like you said, Ed, and then all of a sudden you switch to quarterly without letting me know. It should be nice to let people know that, yeah, initially we're going to be giving you monthly updates, but once the phone is like 1 year old or 2 years old, we're going to change those security patches to quarterly or every 2 months, or whatever the case may be. And Samsung does this sometimes, even with some of its older flagships. And I understand that, but all I'm asking for is let people know upfront so that they know what they're in for.
Absolutely. We need transparency here. Samsung is doing that for their mid-rangers. For the first year, everything is so good, but then things are changing for them. Like when you're getting today's mid-ranger phone, the next year you're really falling behind, and you're getting updates for 4 times in a year, or maybe 5 times in a year. It really depends on them. But if we know how many updates, how many security patches we're gonna get, we can be really like we can consider our choices again. So that's really important. A good point.
Yeah. And then, we wouldn't be blaming them because I go in knowing the
Yeah.
fact that, yeah, I'm
Mhm.
going to be getting monthly security for the very first year. And the year thereafter, this may
Mhm.
trickle down to maybe every 2 months or maybe every quarter. I'm not going to be
Mhm.
griping over that because I went in there knowing. But don't come out telling people you're going to be
Yeah.
getting 5 years of OS support and 6 years of security patch, but then you're not telling them how often those security patches are going to be. These manufacturers are very sneaky. And guys, I'm looking at you. Stop that.
100% agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the punchline of all of this that we've been talking about. When it comes to buying phones, you should make that decision based on what you are able to afford, and also keeping in mind that security, which is very important, and also that OS updates, which may not be very important to you, but at least making sure that you at the very least, get a phone that at least has up to 3 years of those OS updates, because there are certain functionalities, especially for those of us that rely on the screen reader. A sighted person wouldn't even necessarily care, but those of
Mhm.
us that rely on screen readers, there are certain functionalities that would only work when you have an OS update. I'm looking, for example, at the double tap with 2 fingers to start and stop dictation on Pixel phones, but you need a certain OS level update. And so if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. And a lot of people would love to have that capability come to their phones. And this
Absolutely.
is one of the reasons why it is important to make those decisions based on things of this nature. They may seem kind of like trivial or whatever to people, but to me, those are very important.
I think the big one was the HID braille displays, wasn't it? Where you needed Android 15 to have those to work. You needed
Yeah.
a version of TalkBack and your braille display manufacturer to release a driver, but Android 15 was the big thing, and that's where the framework needed to be updated.
Mhm.
Exactly. And that's a huge one, because if you get those humanware devices, you're going to be stuck if you don't have a device that has that level of OS update. You're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And this is why we're talking about this, so that people know what they're getting. And so when you're getting a phone, make sure that it has that OS level update, at least, as we say, be sure that it gets up to 3 or so years at the minimum, those 3, because you don't want to be stuck with your Braille device. Braille devices are very expensive, and you have this expensive thing that you cannot use. I could find myself feeling very angry about that, because you spend all that money only to find out that you cannot use your device with your phone. I mean, it could be so annoying.